evening. It's so nice this Monday morning being here with you guys. This Monday morning, I'm excited to introduce my next guest. This morning, we had a time of our lives, but right now, I just want to welcome you to Casting a Net Mondays with Coach Rice. This is where we dive into topics that matter the most to you, which is your mental health and well being. I'm your host, Coach Rice, your professional certified life and health coach and mental health counselor. I just want to welcome my special guest, Nichole Haugen, a nurse and grief coach who worked as a hospice nurse for over 10 years. And as a grief coach, she supports others on their grief journey and helping them understand um, and reminding them that they don't face this tragedy alone. So I just want to just welcome you, Nichole. Did I pronounce your last name correct?
It's Haugen, so
Haugen.
close enough.
Okay. Haugen. Okay. Nichole Haugen. Okay. Nichole, what I just want to tell, I want to tell the audience where you're from and what inspired you to choose life coaching path in the area of grief.
Yeah, so I am from North Dakota and I born and raised here. And really what led me to grief was for one, like my experience with hospice as a hospice nurse. I was always drawn to that work and enjoyed it so much. But what really drew me in was in 2019, both of my parents died. So my dad had a 10-year battle with cancer and he passed away at the end of July. And then my mom died about 4.5 months later. Suddenly, tragically, she missed her turn into her driveway when it was storming one night and her car went under. And so, dealing with her death, and then it took a day or so for them to find the car, and then another day or so for them to find her body. And I had our sixth daughter that year. So, I had, um, you know, six young children and trying to deal with all the grief that came with that. And then about a month after my mom died, I found out there was financial infidelity in my marriage. And so it really helped me to see that grief isn't just when we have the death of a loved one and how much I really was grieving and putting a name on that really helped me and helped me heal. And so that is what I help others with is grief in many shapes and forms and sizes.
Yeah, that's a lot of loss because people do only usually think of loss as in just death. It's so many other losses that kind of take us into a area of grief, right? And so you've been a hospice nurse, witnessing some profound losses, not just in your workplace but also in your personal life.
Yeah.
Um, how did this experience shape your understanding of grief when it comes to facing loss? Through your own, you know, through your parents and within within that frame.
Yeah. So I think really it gave me a whole new perspective and you hear things, you know things, but like until you're personally going through it, like you don't know what you don't know. And so I think for me especially, it was like, well, I knew grief would come and go, right? Like I knew like, oh, there's different stages and different things, but I didn't understand the intensity of it and how that really like it felt like an attack every time. And I thought like, oh, like I dealt with that. Like that one stage, like, okay, I dealt with it. It shouldn't feel as intense. It shouldn't be as much. And it was. And so just there was a lot of things that I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel crazy. I feel like a crazy person. And so is this normal? And so I think that we don't talk about grief enough. I think that we kind of hold it all in and pretend like we're fine when we're not. And so I just want to normalize grief. I like talking about grief and having places where people can come and like talk about that because there's not always places amongst your friends or family like people either what I've found is that they haven't experienced a profound loss or if they have they've just kind of pushed it to the side and expect you to do the same.
That is so true. You are so right about that. And when you were going through this, did you feel like, did you ever feel like, how am I gonna make it through this? This is overwhelming.
Yeah, there was a lot of days that I was like, there is not much more that I can take. Like, I do, like, at that point, I pretty much thought my marriage was done. I thought that, whatever shape or form that was going to look like, I was like, I don't even have my parents to talk to. Um, my mom was a counselor, and so I really, she would always give her advice or input necessarily when I didn't want it. But then when you don't have that, you're like, oh, I really wish I could talk to my mom about this, like
Right.
about how to fix this marriage, like where do we go from here? What advice would she have? And so, yeah, there was just days where it was like it was so much and just like you just feel like you are just surviving and trying to just get through the day.
So it sounded like you and your husband survived it, right? How
Yeah.
did how did you survive financial infidelity? First of all, some people may not know what that is. I know what it is, but um,
Yeah.
some people may not know what it is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so basically for our whole marriage, so we had been married for 10 years at that point. He had been buying things without my knowledge. He had multiple credit cards taken out and multiple debt racked up. Just basically he fill up a credit card, get another credit card to kind of pay it off. And it accumulated over time, but it really compounded in those last few years before all of it came out. And so um how I found out about it was he didn't tell me about it. I had to sign for a letter that came through the mail saying basically you have to pay this amount or we're going to turn this over to collections. And I had no clue what was happening or what this was. And so he was honest about that one. But over the next few years, more and more came out of how much it was, how there was still hidden debt, how there was still things that he was not talking to me about. And so really it took a lot of, for one, open and honest conversations. And and also like just really for me also to recognize and to realize that I am not perfect either,
Right.
unfortunately. Like there was a lot of things that like he would he would come to me like, "Oh, can I go do this?" And my reactions, my responses told him, "Oh, I should go hide that." And again, like I'm not saying that that's the right way to handle things,
Right.
but not necessarily was my way the right way to handle things either. And so we needed to start having open and honest conversations about around these things and how uncomfortable and painful it was. Like that slowly helped us move forward to another day, another week, another month. And just and then too, I had a cousin who she also is a counselor. She very honestly told me after we'd been with their family, she just told me like you seem very angry, you seem very bitter, like resentful, like what's going on? And it's like, yeah, I am. And so it really helped me look at like, okay, I truly haven't forgiven him. And what does that look like to really forgive somebody? And then to also I think we tell ourselves a lot of these things like, oh, forgive and forget. Like it doesn't mean I forgot what happened. It doesn't mean
Right.
that I'm not triggered sometimes and that there aren't things that we have to like work through over and over again. But it just means like I can truly forgive him and I don't need to hold on to this.
Yeah, and that's when you extend grace, right? Because we in our marriages we're not perfect, and it's so interesting because it could be we think about it could have been me hiding because it happens in a lot of marriages because shame is
Yeah.
connected to you know um, things that we don't want to share,
Mhm.
and so in
Yeah.
marriages we if we share it, it gives us a sense of freedom that we don't really you know pay attention to, but we need it. We need that freedom in communication. We need that freedom to be able to dialogue about not just the things we're doing right, but also the things that we do wrong. And I think that perfection in marriage is so overrated, right?
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's so awesome that you talk about it because it happens so much. It's just that people don't know how to put a name to it. And when you say, financial infidelity, it's not as bad as like, you know, you deceived me. It's kind of you deceived me is a little more harsh, but it's kind of similar with the trust aspect, right? But
Yeah.
like when you were in um so you was a hospice nurse, but you also had to care you was a caregiver to your father, correct?
Somewhat. So he had his own hospice nurses that would come out because I was working for a different hospice, and then so they would come out and my mom was there all the time. So basically she was his caregiver. I lived about an hour away at that point in time, so I would do a lot of like back and forth where if I had a day off, I would try to be out there trying to help with things, trying to do all of the things that a hospice nurse should be doing, but also as a daughter trying to like do all those things. So, there's a lot of grief that comes with that as well, I think, as like knowing what's coming up and knowing what's happening and trying to like want to help your dad, but if your dad is stubborn like mine was, he didn't necessarily take the advice from his child very well. So yeah, I tried to help out when I could. But yeah, my mom was his full-time caregiver those last 3 months. And then my brother also helped a lot because he lived about a mile away from them, so he helped them a lot as
Okay.
well.
And so when dealing with grief, this is one of the things that I often find interesting is people don't know what to say
Hmm.
when they're actually approaching someone who's grieving. What advice would you give on not what not to say?
Yeah, I always say like don't say the cliche things. Like I know it's really hard. I know that that's what we want to say because that's what we've heard, and so that's just like what comes out of our mouth sometimes. But and even that, like it's okay to be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." Like, and I think there's a difference between that versus if you are having a moment and you're sharing with somebody like, "I'm really struggling," and they're like, "Well, but they would want you to be happy." Like things like that just feel very much like, "Okay, I'm uncomfortable, so I don't want to hear about it." Like,
Right.
so I always tell people to like try to say things that are more open, like just even just being there and saying I'm so sorry or giving them a hug or offering like hey I can pick up groceries for you or I'm gonna bring over supper, organizing a meal train, just even sending them a text that has like little hearts emojis, like just like so they know that you're thinking of them without really having to say anything, because I think that's the thing is we think that we need to have the perfect thing to say, but really, it's just knowing that somebody is thinking about us and wants to help, but they really don't know how either.
Yeah, because there's an anxiety around, I want to fix you right now because it'll make me feel better because I'm very
Yeah.
uncomfortable, which is normal to be uncomfortable because death is not a natural thing that we really accustomed to, right? And
Yeah.
so we have, I find that another terrible thing is they're in a better place. Oh, it sound good. It's a cliche, but it's like
Yeah.
horrible. It makes
Yeah.
it really angers the person in grief because it's like, well, they need to be here with me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I like the fact that it's so true because I remember, you know, I sat back and observed one time when I was watching someone deal with grief and just the way that people was approaching it and saw, wow, I never knew how important it is to watch to know what to say and I think the best thing to do is like I'm really uncomfortable, but I want to help. Being that
Yeah.
honest, and authentic with your response helps a lot too because they, they're grieving and we don't want to suppress it. We want them to go through the process.
Yeah. 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 And I do think just being honest with the other person and being like, I really don't know what to say, but I am so sorry. You know, like just, and I think that genuineness that comes out
Mm-hmm.
versus, again, when we say the cliche things, like we just feel so awkward that it's kind of like that's what we grasp onto. And then I think too, also to have like compassion for the people that do say those things because, you know, they haven't experienced something like you have probably. And so
Right.
that's why they are feeling uncomfortable. Or again, they maybe have and they've tried to like push it away. So I would like to like try to have compassion for people. That doesn't always work, especially if it's like very random, like encounter where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I've had it up to here today, and then they said that on top of it, like, oh no, thank you. But later on, then I try to have compassion for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you think about like the stages of grief, and um I know they're not linear,
Yeah.
but how can you tell as a psychotherapist, I mean as a life coach, where they're stuck in certain areas, and what do you do about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I often find like if when you're stuck, you're doing things that you normally wouldn't do, or you're doing things excessively, or you're doing things to try to not have that pain, and it's starting to become a problem. And so for me, like my go-to thing was anger. Like I was angry a lot. Um, and or I ate a lot. I would overeat on almost anything and everything. And so starting to see that like, okay, I don't want to always cope with this. Like the feelings are uncomfortable and painful and awful, but I know that in order for it to get better, that I need to allow them. And so for me, once I started like not having the food that I was relying on, then it was really those emotions started coming up. And then too with the anger, it was recognizing that it was coming up a lot for me, that I at like the drop of a hat, like something would just make me angry. And I don't think that I'm a very angry person. Maybe my husband would say differently, but I don't think I'm a very angry person, like go to move. So I mean I do have a bit of a temper sometimes, but when it was like always just right under the surface, then that's when I'm like, okay, I need to do something about this because I'm showing up, I'm yelling at my kids more, I'm yelling at my husband more. Like I don't like how I'm showing up as a wife,
Right.
as a mom, even as a human. So that's when you kind of know, okay, this something needs to give here.
Yeah, because I remember when my mother had passed away and I was her caregiver. And I remember I didn't want nobody to touch her room.
Yeah.
And then, well, and I think like weeks later, I knew I was stuck when I didn't want nobody to touch her room, like literally go in. And I remember being stuck in the area of the bargaining area where you like it's my fault,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you do this, I mean, if you can do this, because it's so uncomfortable and so overwhelming, where you find yourself like trying to get rid of the pain when you need to process the pain. And I
Yeah.
remember wanting to run. I did not want to. I just wanted to run to another state as if it was going to help my grief, but it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting how we can get in that cycle, and if we don't move along the cycle the right way, we can get stuck, in it and not be able to move forward. So it's good that you doing this kind of work because a lot of people, it's a lot of grief that happens, especially with work, loss of jobs, you know, um, loss of friendships and relationships and things of that nature. So it's good that you do this kind of work. And so you had a very incredible, um, you know, process of what you had been through and was able to get through it, which is great. and I'm sure you went through some challenges that just, that took you to another that took you to another level. It allowed you to be who you are today. What when people are going through layers of grief, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think to really focus out on one thing at a time because for me it was in the beginning like I focused on my marriage, like the grief in my marriage because I knew pretty early on. Of course, I kind of went back and forth on this depending on the day, but I knew pretty early on we were going to stay married. So that was something we decided. Um, and so for me, it was really, okay, I have to live with this person day in and day out. Like my parents are dead, they're gone. Like I put that on a back burner, um, kind of in a sense, to really focus on the grief of my marriage. And of course, like they were so close together time-wise that as I was processing then the grief of my marriage, like a lot of things would come up about my parents. And so it did allow me though to see them kind of separate, even though a lot of times it felt like they were all mushed together.
Yeah.
So really to allow like if I was triggered by something where like I would look at our bank account and I had questions for my husband and then I would be like triggered about some of the things he would say because it felt like, oh, he's just like pushing me off his trail again. Like when I would be triggered by that, then I would also feel very, very sad that my parents weren't there. And so really when I would like kind of like stop crying or stop, like freaking out, then I would really focus on, okay, what are the facts of this? Is what he's saying lining up? Like, can we prove it? Okay, like it's communicating to him, like what you just said triggered me. And then to be like, okay, and I'm also really, really sad because when this happens, it brings up the grief from my parents. And so learning ways that I could specifically express to him what I would need in that moment. And a lot of times there's just like, I really need a hug because I'm really, really sad right now. I'm like, I'm still mad at you. Like,
Right.
I need a hug. So really trying to like layer it out and like focus on one thing at a time.
And I could see how the loss of your parents can make you feel sad during that time because, like you said, your mom was a therapist, and you couldn't go to her and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this."
Yeah.
And that could be, yeah, that could definitely be sad. And it can, and when it's all meshed together, if you don't deal with it separately, it can come down really heavy on you because
Yeah.
you don't know where to begin. It's because it's so everything is just a loss, and it makes you want to give up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of get in like that grief, shame spiral, and you just everything kind of like when you're sick and everything feels horrible, like, and you start to like, oh, like my life is falling apart because I'm not doing this and I'm behind on this. Like, that's kind of what happened also, like, but more intense, I would say, where it just spirals on you. And so to really just deep breath, like, no, what are the facts? What can I focus on right now? Like, piece it
Right.
out. That does help.
What advice would you give someone who wants to rush it?
That it always comes up some way or the other. So if you're gonna rush it, I mean, I feel like again, for me, then I would just end up like binge eating on sweets that evening or lashing out at my kids later on or the next day. So it comes out somehow. So
Yeah, people
try
want
not
to
to
rush
rush
it or
it.
put a time frame. You shouldn't grieve this much, this long, and that's not
Yeah.
fair to the person who's grieving because
Yeah.
grief is based off of so many different variables that take place. Like relate, how was the relationship? What was the relationship? What was the relationship like? What did you actually lose other than just the person or the actual event that happened? What did you actually lose? Because a loss of a job can mean so different for somebody else than it does for me. Or,
Mhm.
a loss of a parent can mean something different to someone else.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, a lot of times people are like, oh, like, well, it's been a year or it's been 6 months. And it's like, there really isn't a timeline on grief.
Right.
Like, you're always going to hold that with you. And so for somebody to say, well, it's been a year, like, I don't know, it's been 5 years for me now and I'm still grieving. Like it's
Yeah,
just
it's been over
it's
10 and
okay.
I still find myself
Yeah.
grieving because and I always tell people that, you know, when you are experiencing grief, it's not such a bad thing. It's that reminder that you were had the ability to, to experience love.
Mhm.
That's what it remind you of, that you had the ability to experience love, and that's powerful because to experience that is awesome, even though it's evident that we if we experience love we're gonna experience loss. It sucks, but
Yeah.
that's what happens. And so always it's a good reminder that I had the ability to experience love, and it comforts me when I think about it, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of the flip side of the coin, right? Like you need both sides to make the whole coin.
Right.
Like you need the grief, but you have the grief because of the love. So the two parts make the whole.
Yeah. Yeah, it does comfort, but so what do you have any books or anything coming up you would like to talk about?
Yeah, so I've been running weekly webinars through my website at nursegriefcoaching.com. And so those kind of change depending on the season that we're in and different things. But
Okay.
running a weekly webinar and helping people through their grief in that way. So doing that is kind of
Oh,
my main thing.
nice. So you run a when you run your webinar, it's a group, it's group sessions that you do, and
Yep, it's a group session, but nobody can see that you're there. I
right,
do
because
it
it's a
webinar
webinar.
style over Zoom. So yep, so then if you have a question, Q&A, like I have that open so people can chat with each other
Oh,
and talk with each
nice.
other if they want. But it is nice in that way. So if people are like, well, I don't want people to see me or I don't want to be on camera, like nobody's on camera except for me. So it's okay. Like you could just hide in the background and ask your
Right.
questions, be anonymous, and it's all good.
So so I do have your links in the vid in on the Facebook chat. I mean on Facebook and on YouTube. I do have all of your links. Thank you for providing them, and that way people can reach out to you and see if they can get if you know, just so you know, if you are experiencing grief, you can go into her. Um, you can connect with Nichole, and you know, and find out about the webinars so that you can get the help you need. And do those webinars cost, or how does that work?
Nope, nope, those are free webinars. So join
Oh,
those. And then I also encourage people, I do a free consult call with grief. And so I encourage people always to book those because not everybody is meant to work with me, but at least then it kind of gives you a starting point to see, okay, yep, like this is somebody who understands. We talk through things and it's just to help you along your grief journey.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and allowing me to dialogue with you about this. I love this topic. I love what you're doing. And just like I said, listeners, if you want to get some help in that area of grief, she has free webinars. Reach out to her. Her contact information is in it. If you find that this was helpful, or you know someone who can utilize this information about grief, please feel free to share, subscribe, and share this video. But we are signing off, and thank you so much for listening to us as we dialogue about grief, and hope we want your mental health to be intact. So this is what we do. We want to share information to help you grow. So thank you for listening. Have a great Monday evening, and thank you so much. We are signing off.